Okay, hello and welcome to our webinar today. Sorry for the delay, we had a few technical things to clarify first. But yeah, we think we can start now. We have changed our setup a little bit today, so we switched to Teams webinars. Hopefully we do not have any problems there, but feel free to let us know if you have any problems with viewing the screen or resolution issues and things like that. Please let us know that. And also, I would like to change the order today a little bit. So I would like to start with a quick introduction about our company, what we do here, and then I would like to focus on the main content. So I'm going to introduce you the topic in the next slide, but first I would like to explain a little bit what we do. Yeah, most of you already know us. We are an ISV based in Austria, and we are focused on Microsoft technology, especially in best practices. So basically what we do is we develop tools to ensure that you're following the best practices regarding development, customizations, but also security, performance, and things like that. So what we do is not that we develop concepts, we develop tools. So you can do all of those things in an automated way. Right now, this is in the very beginning, especially for code analytics. So I'm going to introduce you the tool as well today, but also things like ELM, where you can easily set up automated deployments. And I know there are a lot of pros and cons, but what we do is we try to provide that out of the box. So you can start a new project and have those best practices implemented from the first day. But today, as I said, I'm going to focus on integrations, how you can integrate from Power Platform to Azure components and other systems in the best way. But a few other topics, we mentioned that CI/CD concept, of course, but also logic optimization. That means in many cases, you have a lot of code, but you also have a lot of no-code components. So at the end, it's a mix. And sometimes very challenging to identify, okay, where should I implement the logic? Are there any side effects and things like that? So we try to optimize the logic and avoid, of course, duplicated logic. And so this is one of the things I'm going to explain today, and also performance things and so on. In most cases, enterprises, because in a small context, it's very easy to identify those things. But if the project is getting bigger and you have a lot of different streams, it's very hard to, to understand the big picture. So I'm going to give you some hints about that as well. And also I would like to introduce you another tool where you can easily identify the different streams and data flows and things like that. Okay, then let's take a look at the most important topic today, IntelliSense for Power Platform integrations. And also I would like to talk about the concept, of course, but also about our tools. So how can you achieve that? Because at the end, if you deal with Power Platform, there's a lot of stuff and you can generate that code, of course, but this is not the only thing. So right now we provide a tool where you can have IntelliSense for, of course, logic apps, Azure functions, Power Platforms, or Dataverse, many things like that. But what we also do is we provide a lot of hints about side effects. So when you write some code and, for example, you're going to save an account, and this will trigger a lot of follow-up processes. And as a developer, you usually don't know that. But actually, you don't know the full thing. You just know partial things and maybe some small things in your whole infrastructure, but there's no chance that in your all things and all side effects. And this is what we do here. So we provide instantly information about the side effects of your code statement. So we're going to see that later. But this is why I would like to introduce you to the tool, because if you write some code and you have to deal with Power Platform or some other integrations, it's a great benefit to know what's going on behind the scenes without reading our code. So you can do everything you want within Visual Studio without losing your context and take a look at the other systems. So this is more or less the goal for today. And of course, a few things about best practices and how you can easily achieve that. So let's take a look at the agenda today. Of course, I would like to introduce you to a few things from the past and to be able to understand the challenge. So when I talk about integrations, as I said, I mean, you got Power Platform, you got Azure, you got many different components. And at the end, there are different ways to implement a concept. And we cannot solve that. We cannot say, okay, this is the concept, and you can basically use the same approach for any kind of project. Of course, this is useless. But what we can do is, it doesn't matter which approach you're following, we can provide you best practices to implement that. And this is what I would like to explain to you, okay, what are the most important points to understand why we have to give you recommendations about best practices. And the other thing is FAQs, so a few things from the past, because a lot of people ask me, okay, why are we doing this? What is the benefit? And there are many other tools So why should we use your tools or your product suite and replace the other tools? I don't say that. And this is why I would like to give you some background information about that as well. And as I said, yeah, our Code Analytics tool, which is basically a platform, a few details about that, and a small live demo at the end, just to give you a quick introduction how it works and how you can set up that. And today, as I said, we have a smaller round, so I think we will have enough time for Q&A. And yeah, so then let's start with a quick review of a few questions. And well, let's start with Solution Checker. I think it's a good thing. It's a very good start, but it basically covers only a very, small group of issues, because it is using some out-of-the-box tools like JSHint and stuff like that. Actually, at least I assume that. But it's not detecting a lot of major issues like loops, or when you write some plugins and you're using the wrong stage. So for example, you're doing updates in the post stage and things like that. So right now, as far as I know, it's not possible to detect those kind of things with Solution Checker. So this is why I say, okay, of course you should use it, but do not trust it 100%. I mean, if it runs and if there are no issues, that's fine. That's a good first stage, but as I said, it doesn't cover all kind of things. Yeah. So at the end, you have to try to follow best practices and say, okay, this is my code, and I don't want to retrieve all the data. There should be some conditions and things like that. And by the way, this is one thing we cover. So when we compare our tools, our Code Analytics engine, to things like Solution Checker, we say, okay, that's a good thing, but we have an extended version of that. So what we do is all of those issues or basically risks, we can cover that. So we do deep analysis of the code, but also of other components like Azure functions and things like that. And we can let you know, hey, there's a potential issue. It's recommended to change that because you're not following best practices in a general way, but also in your specific situation, because you have many flows or some other things. And if you do that, you will trigger a lot of other stuff. So this is basically what we provide as a benefit if you compare it to Solution Checker. We do not just cover the basics, we also take into consideration what can happen in your specific environment. So this is one thing. Another thing is about low code first. Well, I do not believe that we will not need developers in the future. I think it is important that we have some kind of no-code, low-code capabilities to cover a few things. But at the end, we have a lot of legacy code. We have a lot of code already in production. So there's a big need to improve the quality of that. That's one reason why we say, okay, we invest a lot of resources into our Code Analytics engine. But the other thing is also in the future, sometimes it is more efficient to implement something in code because the logic is too complex, it's easier to maintain, whatever. So at the end, there's always enough requirements for both cases. So for local components, but also for custom code. And this is why we say, okay, it totally makes sense to invest in our product in the future and also use it right now. And regarding community tools, yeah, well, I like them. I really love them. So if you have something and it's available, you can use it, go for it. Yeah. But sometimes there's a big gap, especially in Dynamics for Code Analytics. I've never seen anything to cover those things like, okay, you're retrieving too much data, you can make a better call, you should replace, create, and update with the upset request and things like that. So there are many things, and I'm not talking about just static pattern matching. That's very easy actually to do that, but it's very difficult to guess what is going to happen during the runtime. So at the end, of course, we do not execute code, but we calculate based on a lot of different aspects what can happen in the future if we execute the code. And we provide a few different, let me call it not guesses, but calculations. If it's better to do it this way or that way, and then you can decide. So at the end, you have to make the decision, but we can warn you. So you don't have to take a look at the different components. You will see immediately, hey, there's a high risk. I should change the code. At least I should review that. And this is why we do that. And yeah, regarding compatibility issues, this was one of the major feedbacks from the last few months when we launched the first version of our Visual Studio extension. We do know that sometimes if you're using some different extensions, there are some conflicts. So far, there are just workarounds, but we're working on that to make it possible to use both in parallel. So we're totally aware of that. And by the way, thanks for the feedback. Okay. And Well, yeah, this is a very interesting thing. If you think about integrations, in many cases, we invest a lot of time to cover those things. Yeah, so if you have integration and you have your system, of course, then you need to know, okay, what's going on, and you have a specific issue, and you're trying to find the root cause of the whole thing. Basically, you have to think about different things like distributed logic. So in most cases, you don't know what's going on if it's implemented in the logic app, in service bus, whatever. You need to take a look at the details, the different components, and you need a lot of time. So I think most of you know what I'm talking about. Knowledge sources. So as I said, what you have to do is go to Azure, go to the code repository. Maybe even worse, if you have to go to Dynamics directly because you don't have the code in your repository. So this is a nightmare, at least. So there are different things, and also compliance. And the last part, there's a specific slide about it as well, things we don't know. And this basically kills us, because in many cases, we can cover the first 3 topics here. And we think that we know everything we need to know. But at the end, it's still not working. And this is in many cases because there's something we don't know about. So let's take a look at the different things here. Yeah, so this is a very classic example of a basic system here. Of course, we got a DB structure. Actually, we don't care about that because in most cases it's managed by Microsoft, so we don't have to do that. But then we have the product load check, and that's always the same. At least in Dynamics, we know, okay, you cannot import products as active state and things like that. So there's a lot of product-specific logic. And when you think about importing entities and doing migration or integrations, whatever, yeah, you need to know that. Yeah? In most cases, you just try that, then you see an error, and then you try again, and things like that. So this is just a basic thing. And then you have many, many different components. I think I don't have to explain the details here. But at the end, you have some kind of integration. So you're exchanging data with different environment, different system. This can be done directly or via Azure Service Bus or whatever. It can be very complicated. And this is what I meant when I say, okay, it's very hard to identify, okay, what are the triggers? So for example, if you're somewhere in the plugin code here and you're writing the plugin and say, okay, everything is fine, usually you don't know what's going on the other side. Yeah? Of course, maybe it's a different team or you haven't been working on that area for a long time. Yeah? So at the end, you're just trying around. And this is where we try to provide a solution. So we try to give the persons working in this area the knowledge about the other areas, but without giving them too much information. So we try to isolate the information for this specific context. And this can be very challenging because in most cases, you don't know what you need to provide. I mean, you're writing an account plugin. Okay, you know something with account, but you don't know, okay, what is related. And this is what we do. We analyze the whole thing and try to give you a very specific context based on the method, based on the things you're using right now, existing code and things like that. And then you have IntelliSense and can just directly go ahead and also consider the side effects of your code. So this is our basic use case here. And of course, the same thing is for business rules and other things and out-of-the-box functionality. So we can cover all of those things. And this is how we do that. I don't want to waste too much time in computer science and stuff like that. So I would like to switch to a more hands-on explanation in a few minutes. But I think it's important to think about those topics in the beginning to understand what I'm talking about. But let's quickly take a look at this example. We got a very classic service.update. And that means, okay, of course, we're updating some kind of entity. So to understand what's going on is, what we usually do is we see an entity and we try to find in our code the definition of that entity, because either we have early bound entities, then we know, okay, it's an account, it's contact, whatever, or it's late bound, then we have to, take a closer look at the code and so on, or maybe it's switch read for something else. Those cases are very easy, but it's getting very tricky when you have something like Azure function. And then you need to know, okay, who is triggering that and what is the data? So we don't know. So you need to take a look at Azure and stuff like that. So you're wasting a lot of time. This is another thing we provide directly in Visual Studio. We will see an example later, but I think you can imagine that when you get that information, you don't have to switch your context. You can directly stay in your coding environment without changing or basically close your context. I think this is a great advantage here. But this is how it works, yeah. So we have the entity, and just explain what we do as a human being, but as a code analytics software, you need to know a few things. At the top, we have those blue boxes. So we have predefined best practices. This is things like, okay, you should not retrieve multiple when you have a specific ID. Classic example, yeah. But also, if you have third-party solutions, there are maybe some recommendations from the third party and things like that from the publisher, or you can have some user-defined best practices because you know your system. And if you have many, many records there and you know, okay, we cannot define an alternative key for some weird reason, yeah, we should define a rule, you should not retrieve the data directly, whatever. Yeah? So there are different sources, but also we need to know, okay, something about our system. So at the end, we have our CM system, of course, with the data model, the data itself, and also our customizations. And I think this is a very important information because usually as a developer, you know what's going on in your system, at least partially you know that, but we know much more than that because we can take a look at the whole system, the data model, workflows, and things like that, so we can provide information about the side effects in real time without taking a look at the different systems because we do it in an automated way. So that's a very, very cool thing. And I've been using this in the past for a long time now for testing purposes, of course. And I saw that it's pretty amazing. So this is why we would like to continue going this way. And of course, we also take into consideration external systems like the repository, components defined in Azure, third-party things and stuff like that. So at the end, we basically take that information and provide different things like productivity. Of course, this is something like IntelliSense, but also visualization. Okay, what's going to happen if you opt in an account? Are there any follow-up processes and things like that? We will see it on the next slide. So this is why we said, okay, let's invest a lot of time in analysis. And now we have different ways to use that data because we already know, okay, what's going on in the system, and then we can just report that. Also system performance, analysis, things like that. So many, many things here, yeah. So the most complicated part is basically how we can analyze the code and also the components, and the rest is just reporting. Okay, then let's take a look at a very recent example here. On the left side, this is the user context. So imagine you're a developer and you're writing some code, yeah. And this is what I was talking about, things we don't know. On the right side, this is a different context. So for example, this is our Azure environment, a Power Platform environment, where we have logic apps or cloud flows or things like that. So something we don't know about. And well, what we can do is we can trigger an update on text identifier with some invalid value. So what usually happens is our coding environment will let us know, hey, this must be a number. You cannot assign that value. Only, of course, if you have generated code, but let's assume that for now. This is all we know. So what we do is we extend the whole concept and say, hey, we know because we have the context information, the value must be a number. Okay, that's obvious. But the value must be equal to 6 because we know, okay, in CRM, the field length is defined as 6. This is one advantage, of course, but more powerful is, okay, if you do that, there's a high chance that you will trigger a follow-up process where we provide billing details. And if you take a look at the right side, the process, let's assume it's a very long and heavy process, long-running process. That's fine. I mean, if we do that, okay, down the road somewhere, it will trigger the process. Okay, it's fine fast. We can ignore that. So, but as a developer, and if I don't know that because I assigned a value, and I know I have to trigger the process, okay, so what I'm going to do is I will trigger the process. I will write some additional code to trigger the process, but I don't know it has already been triggered by the update. So at the end, I will trigger that twice, and I'm wasting a lot of time and maybe some other side effects. And this is why we say, hey, we need to provide that information, or at least warn the user, hey, what you're doing here is correct, but you should not trigger the process a second time because it's already there. So I think you can imagine the whole thing, yeah. So it's very important if you have a big system with many components to understand what's going on in the system without actually take a look at the details. And a very great thing is this is not just for developers. We do the same thing with the portal. if you write a flow and you have no clue about coding, so you don't need to be a professional developer, you just write some flows, and we can provide the warning in the portal and say, hey, there's some code somewhere, a plugin, which is actually doing the same thing. So you should basically not do that or change it in some way, whatever. Yeah. So this is a very cool thing. So at the end, even as a non-professional developer, you will get the same warnings and the same benefits. Yeah. So you don't need to understand the code, because we will do that for you and we'll give you the necessary information to make a decision if you should change it or not. Okay. Well, a very quick thing, yeah. In computer science, we love those numbers, yeah. But I would like to just give you a very quick overview about that. I think you can imagine if you have many layers out of the box logic and code customizations, it's getting complicated. And then you have third-party things. So at the end, if you have many components, and let's assume in the beginning, if you have a very small system as a human being, you can see those lines here. You basically have knowledge about the whole system. So you can cover the whole system with your knowledge because it's a very small thing. But if you have many layers, it's getting more difficult. So at the end, you have almost zero, or a little bit more than 0% covered of the whole system, or even worse, if you think you know that, but you make the wrong assumptions, at the end, you will be somewhere here. So you know the system a little bit, but you also have a few wrong assumptions. And of course, this is not just one example, but I think you can understand what I mean. And if you compare that to a machine in the beginning, it's very hard for a machine to understand what's going on the system because there's not enough information. But as the whole system is getting bigger, more layers are involved, the logic is distributed, whatever, you can understand what's going on. And we have tested that in many different use cases here. At the end, of course, the machine, or actually our code analytics engine, or the whole analytics engine, understands the system much better than you do. And this is why we say, hey, okay, this is a very useful thing. Okay, I'm done with the common part in the introduction. So let's focus a little bit on our code analytics tool. As I said, Kupp Code Analytics is basically a platform to analyze code, but also JSONs or definitions of logic apps and things like that. What we provide right now is a Visual Studio extension to use that technology to improve your coding quality. But what we also do is there's another product. It's a platform to do basically the same thing, but in a much bigger context. So we include many things here, not just the code you're currently working on. There are right now some integrations going on between both products to provide the same capabilities directly into Visual Studio. So I think we're going to launch that at the end of the summer this year. So yeah, at the end, you will have, in both contexts, we'll have the same information. But let's start with a very small example here. And for those of you who already know that, we use the same code, but I would like to focus on a different thing here. So in this case, it's a very straightforward, simple Azure function. So we got our trigger here. In this case, it's as a service bus because we have the queue, but also we are converting that. So I think this is a very common thing. It's in this case, it's JSON. So we deserialize that thing. And at the end, we got the context here. So of course, there are a lot of things to improve here. Let's start with the retrieve statement. We're trying to connect to the system. Those dots must be replaced, of course. Then we retrieve the account. So the first question we can ask ourselves is, okay, how do we know if the primary entity is really an account? Well, if you remember that, as I said, you have to take a look at the triggers. So just based on that code, there's no way to understand or to know if retrieving an account is the correct way to deal with the data, because it depends on the trigger. So you have different components, and each of these components is creating a message. So they will queue a message, and based on that, you can decide, okay, it's an account or something else. And what we do is, when you click on that, we will see, okay, there's a warning, hey, this can't be an account because there's no connection between a system and their service bus. So at the end, you will say, okay, it can be an account, but there must be some trigger. So some component must create a message with some account-related data to make this whole thing useful in any way. Yeah? That's one use case. The second one is, of course, we provide IntelliSense based on the context. We will see that later again. But the second thing what we do is you're retrieving that account. You're using it just for the own ID. And this is also another thing you should not do because you already have the data. So in this case, you have the full context, and as long as you do not filter it in some way, you will have the own ID as well. So the whole statement is totally useless because you will get the same information from the queue item. And this is one thing we can do automatically because we, in our system, we know, okay, we have access to Azure Service Bus, we have access to the different components. So at the end, we know, okay, is this something useful? Do we have an account? And also, do we need to retrieve the data? Two things at the end, we can say, hey, let's replace this statement. We don't need it. We don't need the connection. And we also don't need the retrieve thing because you have it, so you can replace that. And then you create something. Okay, so then I have to correct myself. We need the connection because that's a great statement, but we don't need to retrieve the data. So as you can see, it's getting complicated, even if in a very small and basic example. But for code analytics software, it doesn't matter how complicated it is. At the end, it's the same thing. Yeah, so it's just a repeated process. But as a human being, we're wasting a lot of time doing that. So in most cases, we don't do it. We just go and say, okay, yeah, it's maybe not the best way to do it, but it works. So this is where we say, hey, let's have a software to do it in an automated way. And again, we can do it directly within Visual Studio. This is still in preview, but if you're interested, of course, you can reach out to us and get the preview version so you can try out those things. One more thing behind the scenes, yeah, how it works. This is also a slide from the last webinar, but of course, we need to connect to the Dataverse. But in reality, we do much more than that. We also connect to DevOps, to the Git repository, of course, to some other things like Azure itself, or different resource groups, and we compare those things because at the end, you have something in your code repository and you should deploy it somewhere, but in Azure, you usually don't have the code there. So for example, Azure functions, you can define them based on code, but you also can define them directly within the portal with C# script. So there are different ways to implement logic. And at the end, of course, you try to use the same thing, but you have different team members and different use cases. And this is why we say, hey, we can cover both. So we connect to Dataverse, with Azure, DevOps, and we basically merge all those things into one stream of information. Then we can do the analytics thing, and then we can provide different things, not just entities, fields, and so on, but also side effects. I would like to show you that as well, because this is just a basic thing, yeah. But you need to understand that we have different sources of knowledge to basically cover and give you recommendations to cover the whole system and give you recommendations based on that. This is more or less the same thing as last time, but I would like to bring it up again because I think it's a very, very cool thing. And basically, this is the prototype of our portal to do the analytics thing. So as you can see, if you opt in an account, you can click on that, and you will see all the follow-up processes or the triggers. So in this case, I have some component. It's called sync to ACP. And what it's doing is update an account, but also update the contact. And when I click on that, I can extend that and see, okay, update of an account, there are different triggers, also this one. And if I want, I also can see the follow-up processes. So at the end, what we do is we extract all events of any kind of components, doesn't matter code-based or JSON-based XML, whatever, and provide a visualization of the whole thing. So you don't need to understand the code. You can just go to the portal, type in account, contact, whatever, what you like to see. And then based on that, you can parse through your whole flows and processes and things like that. So I think this is a very cool thing, and you can save a lot of time here. Okay. And then let's take a look at the example here. And before we start, let me zoom in a little bit. I hope you can see everything here. And before we start, let's take a look at the prototype structure. So it's a very easy, straightforward example here. I got some solution and Azure function. And this is basically all I need, yeah. So there's nothing special about that. And in this case, it's already, let me just remove this one here. Okay. Okay. It's a very basic example. So I have my Azure function here, as I said, and it's already pre-configured. So in this case, when you usually install the extension the first time, it will ask you, okay, to connect to your system. So let me show you that. In this case, I got my connection here. So usually you will see a screen like this. So it's a very easy one. So you just have to enter your credentials and stuff, then you can connect. Let's try that. Okay, just so. Okay, there's another screen. Okay, now I know I'm connected, that's fine. And of course, there are some other settings to exclude some things and caching and things like that, but I think it's not important right now. But what we usually do is when we are connected to the system, we need to build up the cache. And this is usually what happens if you start it up the first time. It will ask you for your credentials and so on. Then, oh shit. It will load the metadata. So this process is only needed once. It takes a few minutes depending on the system. In this case, it should be very fast. I think less than a minute or something. Provide IntelliSense within a few milliseconds. Of course, it's needed to cache the data. So if you create new stuff like entities and fields like that, you need to refresh the cache. And this is basically all you need to do. When you're done with that, you have IntelliSense for your environment. You can also connect to Azure and things like that. So I hope the connection is still available because I think I just made a mistake. Yep, but we can see it. So let's try it if it works. And here we go. That's a cool thing. So as you can see, I got my context here because I only see stuff from the account because I'm retrieving an account. So the only useful or meaningful couple of attributes are here. And this is basically all I need to know. Yeah. So let's go for, I don't know, name. It's selected over time. Name of an account. And by the way, of course, I got the type here. So this is quite useful if you're not sure it's an 𝗲𝗄𝗃 or something else, option set, whatever, also descriptions, things like that. So this is pretty useful. But as I said, this is just the basic things. What we do in the next release is we will include all of those side effects and information about your logic apps and Azure functions, so you can call them directly from your environment without taking a look at the portal and copy the name. So this is what we're going to do in the future with the next release based on our new extended code technology. And yeah, so I'm really looking forward to that when we are able to launch the whole thing. So then let me take a look at the next slide. Yeah, one important thing. So let me go back to my slides here. Our tester campaign is still running, but I think it's only valid for the next 2 or 3 weeks. I'm not sure about that. So if you'd like to join the tester campaign, please just feel free to sign up the form so you will get the licenses for free. And yeah, the next thing is no. Okay, well, I'm already done with my main content here, so I was a little bit faster than I thought. So let's take a look at the questions for today. Just give me a sec to review those. Okay, so I just need a few seconds to take a look at those settings. Questions here. Okay. It's a little bit tricky for me because we have the official question stream, but there's a second stream with hidden questions, so I need to, sort that out. Okay. Well, I think there's one question about TypeScript. Yeah. Yes, we do support TypeScript as well. Not JavaScript directly. There are some plans to support it as well, but for JavaScript, it's much more difficult to do that, and sometimes there's a high chance that we give more recommendations about that. So right now we're focused on TypeScript, but it's it's a recommendation anyway to prefer TypeScript over JavaScript. That's one thing. And also, if we can integrate into Azure pipelines, that's a good one. Yes, we do support Azure pipelines, and what we also will do is we're going to integrate with Azure pipelines to ensure all of your coding or new component stuff is aligned with the best practices. So that's one thing we're going to do, but not with the Visual Studio Extension. This will be part of the portal. And I think at the end of the summer or end of the year, I can't say it for sure right now, but yeah, that's on our roadmap. A lot of questions about early bound entities and release dates. Yeah, as I said, no specific release dates right now. And of course, we do support both early bound and late bound entities because at the end, it doesn't matter if you have early or late bound. The best practice is the same, so you should not retrieve too much data. You should not trigger an update in the post stage. And in any case, you would like to know what's going on behind the scenes in your environment if you do something like trigger, delete, or whatever. So I think there's a lot of room for improvements regarding best practices, especially for dynamics. So yeah, I'm looking forward to those features. And as I said, no specific release date, and also does it apply for Azure Functions. Of course, we do support any kind of component. So there's no limitations as long as it is based on C#, JavaScript, or TypeScript, or any kind of Azure component based on JSON, XML, and things like that. So we do not cover Java or any other languages right now. Okay, there are a few other questions as well, but I think I'm running out of time then. Okay, let's just wait a second if we have any other questions here. Okay. Another topic regarding, another question regarding early bound entities. Actually, I'm a big fan of early bound entities because generated code is usually, easier to handle. But sometimes you have small things like, for example, Azure Functions. You don't have a very big project context. So mostly you would like to keep it very simple. So you don't want to generate a very big thing and have merging and any kind of IL merge configuration stuff and so on. So sometimes you have that in a big project, that's totally fine. But if you have a small component and don't want to have any dependencies, then it's easier just to go for a early bound or late bound. And this is why we provided that information. But as I said, our Visual Studio Extension right now provides features for attributes, relations, and things like that. So you have IntelliSense, but main goal is to provide you information about the whole environment, like side effects, and is there any risk and best practices in total. So right now it's the beginning, but we're going to launch the next version soon where you have a lot of features to improve your code. Okay, a few things about deployments. Well, for any questions regarding deployments and so on, please take a look at the website. Many of them are answered there, so you will find the details there. And if you don't have enough information there, feel free to reach out to us. But basically, you can see that information there. Okay. Well, then I think I'm done with the content here. So thanks for listening. And again, feel free to sign up for the tester campaign so you will get the licenses for free. You can play around a little bit and let us know if you have any feedback. Okay, thanks for listening. Goodbye.